Today we're going to be looking at section 6-2. The objective of this section is to multiply and divide radical expressions. The standard this comes from is Math 9 through 12, Algebra 6.2. Multiplying radical expressions. In order to multiply or divide radical expressions, the index must be the same. Remember that the index is the number in front of the variable. So the index for this one is 3, and the index for this one is 2. If there's not an index there, we assume it to be a 2 for a square root. Because these indexes are not the same, this is not possible to multiply or divide. So if it asks you to multiply this, you would say, not possible. Let's take a look at this one. This time the indexes are the same. You have an index of 3 and an index of 3. So when you multiply them, it becomes the cube root of -4 times 2, which is -8. Then we simplify the cube root of -8, much like we did yesterday, to find that the final answer is -2. Let's take a look at this one. Once again, the indexes on this are 4 and 5. Because the indexes are not the same, this one is not possible. Finally, let's look at this one. This time our indexes are 5 and 5. They are the same, so we will multiply them together, getting the 5th root of -5 times -2, which is 10. If you try to break down 10, you will only get 2 times 5. That does not make a group of 5 of anything, so you cannot simplify it any further. This is your answer. Let's look at simplifying radical expressions. Yesterday we looked at simplifying radical expressions. Yesterday we looked at simplifying radical expressions, so we're going to look at the same thing today, but today they don't simplify as easily as they did yesterday. So let's take a look. What multiplies to make 54? 6 times 9. 6 is 2 times 3, and 9 is 3 times 3. Because we're doing cube roots, we need to look for groups of 3. We have a group of 3 3s, so we can take out a 3. Because the 2 doesn't make a group, it'll go back in the root after we finish simplifying. Now, we learned yesterday that we take the index and divide it into the power. When you try and divide 3 into 5, it doesn't go in evenly. So what we'll do is we'll say 3 divides into 5 one time with a remainder of 2. How many times it divides is how many x's we get to take out. So we can take out an x to the first power. Then inside the root, we leave the things that did not create a group or go in evenly. So this 2 earlier that I said did not fit into a group gets to go back into the root. And then the remainder, when I divided the index into the power of the x's, goes back into the root as well. So we put in an x squared. And this is the simplest form of the third root of 54x to the 5th. Let's look at another example. The third root of 128x to the 7th. So again, let's break down 128. What makes 128? times 32 will make 128. 32 breaks down into 4 times 8. And 8 breaks down into 4 times 2. Since I'm looking for groups of 3, I find that there are 3 4s in 128. So I can take out a 4. The 2 left over will go back into the root. So now let's divide 3 into 7. How many times will 3 go into 7? 2 times, with a remainder of 1. So again, the 2 is what I get to take out. So I can take out an x to the second power. Then left inside my root are the things that did not make groups. Like this lonely little 2 has to go back in the root. And then my remainder of 1x has to go back into the root as well. So when you are dividing the index into a power, how many times it divides in is how many variables you get to take out. The remainder of it is how many are left in. Let's try one more example. This time we're going to multiply together the two radicals and then simplify. So we multiply these two together, and instead of actually multiplying 72 times 10, I'm going to leave it as 72 times 10, because then I'm going to need to turn around and break it down. When I multiply together the variables, you add the powers. So when I do x to the third times x to the first, I get x to the fourth power. Then when I do y squared times y to the third, I get y to the fifth. Now let's simplify. 72 is 9 times 8. 9 is 3 times 3. There's a group of two things. 8 is 4 times 2, and 4 is 2 times 2. There's another group of two things. 10 breaks down into 2 times 5. Now you can borrow things from other numbers that broke down. So this 2 left over in the 72, I can join together with the 2 inside the 10 and create another group. So I have a group of 2, 2, and 3. When I multiply all that together, I get 12. 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12. Remember, you're not multiplying what's in the group, you're multiplying the number from the group. Now let's do our variables. Since there's no index, we assume it to be a 2. So 2 divides into 4 2 times. So I can take out an x squared. Since it divides in evenly, there are no remainders. Then 2 divides into 5 2 times, but this time it has a remainder of 1. So I get to take out a y squared, and then left inside my root is this lonely little 5 that didn't make a group. When I divided the x's, there was no remainder, so there are no x's left. But when I divided the y's, there was a remainder of 1, so there is a y to the first power left. So let's look at dividing radical expressions. What is the simplest form of these two radicals? Same thing with multiplication. We multiplied the two radicals before we simplified. So this time we're going to divide the two radicals and then simplify. So what we do is we do 18 divided by 2 is 9. When you divide the variables, you will subtract the powers. So x to the fifth divided by x to the third makes x to the second power. and it stays underneath the square root, because all I did was divide the numbers under the square root, but the square root will stay. Now I can simplify this square root. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of x squared is x. Let's look at another example. This time we're taking the cube roots. So after I divide, it will go inside of a cube root. So I'm going to do 162 divided by 3. 162 divided by 3 makes 54. And then y to the 5th divided by y squared makes y to the 3rd. Again, you do 5 minus the 2, which gives you a y cubed. Now let's take the cube root of this. 54 breaks down into 6 times 9. 6 breaks down into 2 times 3, and 9 becomes 3 times 3. So we can make a group of 3 3s. So we can take out a 3. Then 3 divides into y cubed one time, giving us a y to the 1st power. Because I had a 2 left over, I need to put on a cube root of 2. Because the 2 did not make a group, it goes back into the root. Let's try one more. Same thing. Let's divide these before we simplify. Because it's a square root here, once we divide, it'll go back into the square root. 50 divided by 2 is 25. When I do x6 divided by x to the 4th, subtract 6 from 4 and you get x squared. Now let's take the square root. The square root of 25 is 5, and the square root of x squared is x. There are no leftovers or remainders here, so that is my answer.